Some houses can be emptied in a week. Others keep holding the lives people tried to leave behind. A Navy SEAL returned to his mother's Wisconsin home with a guarded German Shepherd and her 2 young puppies, planning to sell the house and leave within 7 days. But on the first night, a blue window glowed across the snow. Then came a knock. An elderly woman stood outside holding an empty cup, asking whether the house was still open. Why did that blue light bring strangers to the door? Why had his mother never told him what it meant? And why did the wary mother dog refuse to leave the window? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below.
Late winter rested over Eau Claire, Wisconsin, beneath a pale afternoon sky, and fine snow crossed the narrow streets like flour shaken from an old woman's hands. People said a house could be emptied in 7 days if a person worked hard enough. Ethan Miller knew better. Furniture could be boxed and keys surrendered, but there was no carton large enough for everything a family had refused to say. At 46, Ethan still looked like the Navy SEAL he had once been. 6'2", broad-shouldered with short dark brown hair graying at the temples, a neatly trimmed beard, and a faint scar beside his left eyebrow. His gray eyes stayed alert even when exhaustion darkened the skin beneath them. A deep injury in his right shoulder had ended his service early, and broken sleep had left him impatient with anything he could not control. Ethan was polite with strangers, useful when something broke, and nearly impossible to comfort. His pickup stopped before a modest 2-story house with faded cream siding and dark green shutters. The house belonged to his mother, Eleanor Miller, a 74-year-old widow with silver hair, pale, weathered skin, and small, capable hands that smelled of lavender soap. 3 weeks earlier, a stroke had weakened her left side and interrupted her speech. She was now in a rehabilitation center across town. Ethan had come to clear the house, sell it, and use the money for her care. 7 days, that was the plan. He brought 1 suitcase, a folder of medical bills, a for sale sign, and 3 German Shepherds. Sadie climbs down first. The 4-year-old mother dog had a strong, sable body, black saddle markings, a thick winter coat, and amber eyes that studied every doorway. A notch marked her left ear. Sadie listened when trust agreed with the command. Otherwise, she chose for herself. 2 7-week-old puppies followed from a padded crate. The male was sturdy, with a dark mask and oversized paws. The smaller female had tan eyebrows and pressed against her mother whenever the world changed too quickly. Ethan carried the puppies to the sidewalk and opened the iron gate. It groaned on its hinges. Inside, the puppies leaned forward. Sadie did not. She stood beyond the gate with her legs braced and ears high. Ethan shortened the leash. "Come on." Sadie stepped backward. The pull struck his injured shoulder, sending pain down his arm. Irritation followed. He had driven 4 hours through snow, heard the phrase long-term care 3 times, and calculated how quickly the house needed to sell. "Sadie, inside." He pulled again. Sadie lowered her head and showed the edge of her teeth. She did not lunge. Instead, she moved between Ethan and the puppies. For 1 hard second, Ethan felt the old need to establish control before uncertainty became danger. That instinct had once kept men alive. It had also made him difficult to live with. Then the smaller puppy whimpered. Ethan finally saw what Sadie saw. An enclosed yard, a strange house, and 1 narrow exit. She was deciding whether he meant to trap her babies. Ethan loosened the leash, sat on the snowy sidewalk, and unclipped it. "All right," he said. "Your decision." Snow gathered on his beard. The male puppy tried to chew the gate. The smaller one sat on Ethan's boot. Sadie remained still. Ethan did not call or reach for her. Silence had never been his favorite tool. Silence allowed another living creature to refuse him. Nearly half an hour passed before Sadie crossed the gate. She inspected the porch and fence before turning back. Only then did the puppies follow. Ethan remained seated another moment. It was the first order he had lost that day, and perhaps the first useful thing he had done. That dog has better judgment than most officers I've known. Grace Turner stood behind the neighboring fence.
She was 76, tall and lean, with freckled fair skin, straight silver-white hair cut to her jaw, and bright hazel eyes. A navy wool coat hung from her narrow shoulders, and she held a snow shovel like a walking staff. Her face looked severe until dry humor lifted one corner of her mouth. "How long have you been watching?" Ethan asked. "Long enough to know the dog won." Ethan lifted the for sale sign from the truck. Grace's amusement vanished. "You're selling Eleanor's house? I have 7 days to empty it." Grace looked toward the front window. Near its lower corner sat a square of deep cobalt glass among the clear panes. "The windows are old," Ethan said. "I may replace them." Grace pointed her shovel toward the blue pane. "You can take off the roof if you like, but don't touch that window." "Is there a structural reason?" "No." "Historical value?" "Not the kind an appraiser understands." Ethan decided Grace was the sort of neighbor who mistook proximity for authority. "I'll remember that."
"No, you won't," she said. "Perhaps the house will remind you." By dusk, Ethan had covered the kitchen table with bills and moved 3 boxes. Sadie had chosen a guarded place beneath the table for her puppies. The house smelled of cedar, dust, and lavender soap. Ethan avoided looking too long at the family photographs on the mantel. Every picture seemed to hold a version of his life that had continued without asking whether he wished to be part of it. He told himself the photographs were only objects. Objects could be wrapped in newspaper. Objects could be placed in boxes. Yet his hand stopped each time he reached toward them. Sadie watched from beneath the table, her chin resting between her paws. Ethan wondered whether the dog recognized avoidance when she saw it. He suspected she did. When darkness filled the room, he reached behind a chair and switched on an old table lamp. Light passed through the cobalt pane, casting a blue square onto the snow outside. It appeared vivid and clean against the white ground, like a small piece of evening sky that had fallen at the foot of the porch. Sadie raised her head. Both puppies became still. A few minutes later, someone knocked. Ethan opened the door expecting Grace, a real estate agent, or a nurse from the rehabilitation center. Instead, an elderly woman stood on the porch. She was short and softly rounded, perhaps 82, with white curls beneath a gray knitted cap and tired blue eyes set in a dignified face. Her brown coat was carefully buttoned, though one button sat in the wrong hole. She held an empty ceramic cup in both hands. The woman did not introduce herself. She looked beyond Ethan toward the blue light, as though the house, not the man standing in its doorway, had invited her there. "Is the blue still open?" she asked. The elderly woman remained beneath the blue square of light, holding the empty cup as though it were not empty at all, but filled with something fragile that might spill if Ethan asked the wrong question. She was Nora Blake, 82 years old, short and softly built, with white curls escaping from beneath a gray knitted cap and pale blue eyes that seemed both tired and stubbornly awake. Her brown wool coat was clean but old, its cuffs polished smooth by years of wear, and one button had been fastened into the wrong hole. A thin gold wedding band remained on her left hand. Nora carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had spent a lifetime refusing to become an inconvenience. Ethan stood in the doorway, one hand on the frame and the other near Sadie's collar. The German Shepherd had risen beneath the kitchen table. Her sable body was rigid, her amber eyes fixed on the stranger, and both puppies had pressed against her belly. "Can I help you?" Ethan asked. Nora looked past him toward the glowing cobalt pane. "I did not ask for help." Her answer was neither rude nor grateful. It was simply precise. Ethan glanced at the empty cup. "Do you need something to drink?" "No." "Are you lost?" "No." "Then why are you here?" Nora lifted her chin slightly. "Because the blue light is on." Ethan felt irritation move through him, not because the woman had done anything wrong, but because she had arrived without offering him a problem he understood how to solve. He could repair a roof, change a tire, carry a wounded man through smoke, or calculate how long his mother's savings might survive rehabilitation fees. He could not understand an elderly stranger who appeared in the snow with an empty cup and refused to explain herself. "Eleanor isn't here," he said. Something in Nora's face softened, though it did not break. "I know." Ethan almost closed the door, but the wind pushed snow across the porch behind her. Whatever else he had become, he could not leave an 82-year-old woman standing in the cold. He stepped aside. "Come in." Nora entered without thanking him, removed her cap, and walked directly to the kitchen table as if she had sat there many times before. Sadie moved at once, placing her body between Nora and the blanket-lined basket where the puppies rested. A low warning sound gathered in the mother dog's chest. Nora stopped. She did not reach down or speak in the bright, foolish voice adults often used around animals. Instead, she looked at Sadie and said, "You have every right to be suspicious." Ethan watched the exchange with surprise. "She has young puppies." "I can see that." Nora placed the empty cup on the table and sat with both hands folded in her lap. "Please do not ask me anything for 10 minutes. Ethan stared at her. "You walked into my mother's house and want me not to ask why?" "For 10 minutes. Why 10? Nora gave him a level look. That was a question. Ethan checked the clock above the stove. He had spent years learning to function within rules, but Nora's rules seemed designed to make him uncomfortable. He poured coffee anyway because movement was easier than stillness. He placed a cup before her. Nora did not touch it. For the first minute, Ethan listened to the refrigerator hum. During the second, the male puppy scratched at the basket. By the third, Ethan became aware of his own breathing. Silence had weight when shared with another person. It revealed every unfinished sentence hiding beneath polite conversation. Ethan looked at Nora's empty cup, the wedding ring on her finger, and the single damp line where melted snow had darkened her sleeve. He wanted to ask whether someone was waiting for her at home, whether she had eaten, whether she was safe. Questions would have allowed him to become useful. Nora denied him that refuge. The back door opened without a knock, and Grace Turner entered carrying a loaf of bread wrapped in a dish towel. Snow dusted her silver-white hair and the shoulders of her navy coat. "I saw Nora cross the street," she said. "Then I saw you let her in without calling the police, so I assumed progress had occurred." Ethan frowned. "Does everyone in this neighborhood enter through whichever door they prefer?" "Only the respectable ones." Grace set the bread on the counter and peered into Ethan's coffee pot. "Good heavens, this could remove paint from a battleship." "It's coffee." "It is evidence." Nora's mouth twitched, though she remained silent. Ethan looked from one woman to the other. "Will someone explain what is happening?" Grace checked the clock. "Has she had her 10 minutes?" 7. "Then you have 3 minutes to develop patience. Try not to injure yourself." Ethan folded his arms. A kettle on the stove began to whistle sharply. Grace continued unwrapping the bread without reacting. Ethan turned off the burner. "You didn't hear that?" "Hear what?" Grace asked too quickly. "The kettle. Of course I heard it. You were standing beside it, and yet the house remains unexploded." Grace's humor came fast, but her eyes avoided his. Ethan remembered how she had answered a different question at the fence earlier and how loudly she sometimes spoke. He understood then that the sharp, lively woman was hiding hearing loss behind jokes and confidence. When he started to ask about it, Grace gave him a look hard enough to close the subject before it began. At 10 minutes, Nora reached for the coffee Ethan had poured. "Your mother called this the blue hour," Grace explained. "Every Wednesday evening, Eleanor switched on the lamp behind that window. Anyone whose house felt too quiet could come here." Ethan looked toward the blue pane. "For food?" "Sometimes there was food," Grace said.
But that wasn't the point. Money? No. Transportation? Medical assistance? Grace shook her head. No lists, no appointments, no questions. People came because they did not want to sit alone, and Eleanor let them sit without making them confess to loneliness. Ethan felt something tighten behind his ribs. His mother had barely spoken during their recent calls. Their conversations had been reduced to weather, medication, and whether Ethan was sleeping. Whenever Eleanor asked him to visit, he had found a reason not to come. Yet she had apparently offered strangers an open door every Wednesday. She never told me, he said. Maybe she thought you would turn it into a program, Grace replied. Ethan's jaw hardened. At least a program would make sense. Nora finally lifted the coffee. Not everything painful becomes easier when given a name. Ethan looked at her. He heard his mother's voice in the sentence, or perhaps only imagined it. That possibility angered him more. Sadie moved as Nora shifted in her chair. The mother dog stepped closer to the basket, lips tightening over her teeth. Don't reach toward them, Ethan warned. Nora did not. The smaller female puppy, however, pushed awkwardly past Sadie's front leg. The 7-week-old German Shepherd crossed the kitchen in uncertain steps, sniffed Nora's shoe, then placed both front paws on the worn leather. Sadie's growl deepened. Nora remained perfectly still. The puppy circled once, curled against Nora's foot, and fell asleep with her chin resting across the toe. The room changed. Nothing dramatic happened. No one laughed or cried. Yet the tension lost its edge. Sadie watched for several long seconds before lying down again, though her eyes remained open. Nora looked at Ethan. She does not trust me. No, Ethan said, but she allowed the puppy to decide. Nora lowered her gaze to the small, sleeping body. That may be more generous than trust. Grace cut the bread and complained that Ethan owned no proper butter knife. Ethan ignored her, but he poured fresh coffee for both women. They stayed less than an hour. No one asked Nora why she had needed 10 silent minutes. By the time she stood, the blue square outside had grown darker against the snow. Nora paused beneath the cobalt pane and looked back at Ethan. Eleanor never saved us, she said. She simply made sure we did not disappear. Then she stepped into the night. After the door closed, Ethan returned to the kitchen table. The for sale folder lay beside his 7-day checklist. Replace damaged shingles, empty upstairs bedrooms, call the realtor, sort Eleanor's papers, replace front windows. Ethan held the pencil above the final line. He thought of Nora sitting without explanation, Grace laughing beside a kettle she could not hear, Sadie allowing one small choice, and his mother creating a place where dignity did not have to be exchanged for company. Ethan drew one firm line through the words, replace front windows. By the following Wednesday, the snow over Eau Claire had hardened into pale ridges along the sidewalks, and the evening sky carried the flat gray color that made every window look warmer than it truly was. Ethan Miller had decided the blue hour could continue while he cleared his mother's house, but only if it became orderly. Order, in Ethan's experience, prevented confusion, reduced risk, and gave people something firm to stand on when emotions became unreliable. He placed 6 chairs in a precise semicircle around the living room, leaving equal space between them. On the kitchen counter, he arranged paper cups, tea bags, sugar packets, and napkins in separate rows. He wrote a schedule in block letters. Blue hour, Wednesdays, 6 to 7:30 p.m. Below that, he added several rules. Visitors must sign in. No unannounced guests after 7. Medical concerns must be stated clearly. Transportation requests should be submitted in advance. Beside the front door, Ethan placed a clipboard with 3 columns. Name, time of arrival, reason for visit. He studied the arrangement with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had restored control to something dangerously vague. Sadie watched from beneath the kitchen table, her 4-year-old sable body curved around the 2 German Shepherd puppies. Her amber eyes followed Ethan as he carried the blanket-lined basket from under the table to a corner near the fireplace. Warmer here, Ethan explained. Better airflow, less foot traffic.
Sadie rose immediately, gripped the male puppy gently by the loose skin behind his neck, and carried him back beneath the table. Then she returned for the smaller female. Ethan stared. No. He moved both puppies back to the fireplace. Sadie repeated the process. The male puppy appeared delighted by the transportation service. The smaller female looked offended by the interruption to her nap. Ethan tried a third time, shifting the basket to the opposite wall and placing 2 folded towels around it. Sadie waited until he stepped away, then carried each puppy back beneath the table with the solemn patience of a mother correcting a slow child. Outside the window, Grace Turner stood in her yard, gripping the handle of her snow shovel. Her shoulders began to shake. Ethan opened the back door. "Are you laughing?" Grace pressed one mitten against her mouth, but tears had already gathered in her hazel eyes. "I am trying to be respectful. You are failing. So are you." Ethan glanced towards Sadie. The mother dog had settled beneath the table, one puppy tucked against her chest, and the other sprawled across her front paws. "The fireplace is warmer?" "Perhaps she is not choosing warmth." "Then what is she choosing?" Grace leaned through the doorway and pointed. From beneath the kitchen table, Sadie had an unobstructed view of the front entrance, the back door, the hallway, and both puppies. The fireplace corner allowed her to see only half the room. Ethan looked again and felt the irritation inside him loosen into reluctant understanding. Sadie had not been resisting comfort. She had been creating a defensible position. "She wants both exits in sight," he said. "Imagine that," Grace replied. "A creature making decisions for reasons other than irritating you." Ethan carried the empty basket beneath the table and pushed it into the place Sadie had selected. The mother dog sniffed the towels, circled once, and settled inside without protest. Grace's smile became unbearably pleased. "Do not say anything." "I was only going to congratulate the commanding officer." Sadie rested her head over the basket's edge, and Ethan could have sworn the dog looked smug. At 6 o'clock, Ethan switched on the lamp behind the cobalt pane. Blue light fell across the snow outside, clear and unmistakable. Then he waited. At 6:10, the chairs remained empty. At 6:20, the tea water cooled in the kettle. At 6:45, Ethan adjusted the clipboard so it faced the door more directly. No one knocked. Grace entered through the back at 7, carrying a small tin of oatmeal cookies. "You frightened them away," she said after reading the rules. "I made the expectations clear." "Exactly." Ethan pointed toward the sign-in sheet. "People should know why they're here." Grace placed the tin on the table. "They did know. They were here because the blue light was on." "That is not a reason." "It was enough for Eleanor." Ethan felt the familiar heat rise behind his ribs. "My mother had the luxury of making everything informal. I am the one handling medical bills, property estimates, insurance forms, and a house full of people who apparently appear whenever they feel lonely." Grace's expression changed. The humor did not disappear, but it withdrew to a safer distance. "People did not come here to be processed, Ethan." "Then what did they come for?" "To avoid becoming a problem long enough to remember they were still people." The sentence remained between them. Ethan looked toward the unused chairs. He had thought structure would make strangers feel safe. Instead, the rules had turned the room into an office, and the clipboard had asked them to justify crossing the threshold. A phone rang somewhere beneath Grace's coat. Grace continued opening the cookie tin. Ethan waited. The ringing continued. "Your phone," he said. "What about it?" "It's ringing." Grace frowned, reached into the wrong pocket, then the other. By the time she found the device, the call had stopped. The screen displayed 6 missed calls from Carol. Almost immediately it rang again. Grace answered on video by mistake. A woman's face appeared on the screen. Carol Turner was 52, tall and narrow-faced, with fair skin, chin-length auburn hair threaded with silver at the temples, and green eyes, shaped like Grace's but worn by less sleep.
Even through the small screen, Carol carried the brisk, contained energy of someone accustomed to solving emergencies from 3 hours away.
"Mom, where have you been?" Carol asked. "In my house. I called 6 times." "Then you should have taken the hint." Carol closed her eyes briefly. "Did you find your keys?" Grace's mouth tightened. Ethan looked at her. "What keys?" "Nothing. You called me this morning because you couldn't find them," Carol said. "They were in the refrigerator." Grace's face sharpened. "They were beside the milk, perfectly visible. Keys do not belong beside milk. Perhaps yours don't." Carol leaned closer to the camera. "I sent you information about the assisted living community in Milwaukee. They have private apartments, a garden, and staff nearby if you need them." "I do not need staff nearby."
"You didn't hear the kettle yesterday. You didn't hear your phone tonight. You put your house keys in the refrigerator." Grace ended the call. The kitchen became very quiet. Ethan studied her. "How long has your hearing been getting worse?" "My hearing is fine." "Grace, do not use that tone with me." "What tone?" "The one men use when they decide concern gives them authority." She reached for the cookie tin. "I am not moving to Milwaukee because Carol has discovered attractive brochures." She sounds worried. Worry is not ownership. Grace's hands trembled slightly as she closed the tin, but her voice remained hard. The more frightened she became of losing independence, the more fiercely she performed strength. Ethan recognized the strategy because he had built half his life from it. After Grace left, Ethan removed the rules from the wall and carried the untouched cups into the kitchen. The blue pane continued glowing over an empty room. While searching a desk drawer for tape, he found a folded note written in Eleanor's uneven hand. "Do not repair what needs to be witnessed." Ethan read it twice. Anger came first, anger at his mother's riddles, at Grace's judgment, at Carol's fear, at strangers who wanted company but rejected questions. He crushed the note and threw it into the trash. Later, when the lamp had been switched off and the room had returned to darkness, Ethan sat alone among 6 empty chairs. Sadie remained beneath the table, watching both doors. Ethan reached into the trash, recovered the note, and slowly smoothed it flat against the table. The morning after, the empty blue hour arrived cold and windless, with sunlight resting thinly across the snow between the 2 houses. Ethan Miller stood in his mother's kitchen, holding Eleanor's wrinkled note beneath the cobalt window. "Do not repair what needs to be witnessed." He still disliked the sentence. It offered no procedure, no measurable outcome, and no useful definition of success. Yet he had placed it beside the coffee pot instead of returning it to the drawer. Beneath the table, Sadie rested with both puppies pressed against her sable coat. The male German Shepherd puppy slept on his back, oversized paws folded against his chest. The smaller female was awake, watching Ethan through tan eyebrows that gave her the appearance of questioning every decision he made. Ethan opened the back door to carry a box toward the garage. Cold air entered the kitchen. Sadie raised her head immediately. Ethan was gone for less than a minute, but when he returned, the smaller puppy was no longer beneath the table. The male puppy remained beside Sadie, who was already standing, nose lifted toward the open door. "Where did she go?" Ethan asked, as though the mother dog might provide coordinates. Sadie rushed outside. Small paw prints crossed the porch, continued through the snow, and disappeared beside a loose board at the bottom of the fence. Ethan crouched and found a narrow gap where winter had pushed the wood away from the post. The puppy had squeezed through into Grace Turner's yard. Sadie pawed at the opening, too large to follow. "Stay here," Ethan ordered. Sadie ignored him and ran toward the gate. Ethan followed, his injured shoulder tightening as he forced the frozen latch upward. The puppy's tracks led across Grace's yard to the back steps. Ethan knocked on the kitchen door. No answer came. He knocked harder. "Grace?" Sadie stood beside him, ears forward, then barked sharply. The sound carried across the quiet neighborhood. Still no movement appeared inside. Ethan looked through the glass and saw the puppy near the kitchen table, barking towards something beyond his view. He tried the handle. The door was unlocked. "Grace, I'm coming in." The kitchen smelled of oversteeped tea and something scorched. A metal kettle shrieked on the stove. Ethan turned off the burner, then saw Grace sitting on the floor beside an overturned chair. Broken cups and pieces of a wooden tea tray surrounded her. Her straight silver-white hair had fallen across one cheek, and a small red mark darkened the pale skin near her temple. She held one wrist against her chest, but her hazel eyes were alert and furious. The female puppy stood beside Grace's knee, wagging uncertainly. "Don't make that face," Grace said. Ethan knelt.
What face? The one that says I'm about to become paperwork. Did you hit your head?
Barely.
Did you lose consciousness?
No.
Are you dizzy?
Only when men ask several questions without listening to an answer. Ethan moved the broken porcelain aside.
Can you stand?
Of course. Grace attempted to rise, winced, and sat back down. Sadie entered cautiously, found her puppy, then inspected Grace from a short distance. Ethan noticed the kettle's warning had been sounding long enough for water to spit across the stove. Grace had not heard it. She had not heard his knocking, Sadie's barking, or the puppy in her kitchen. A cold certainty settled inside him. "You need to see a doctor." "I need a new cup." "You may have injured your wrist." "It is bruised." "Carol needs to know." Grace's expression hardened.
Carol does not need a report each time I meet the floor.
"You also need a hearing evaluation."
No.
"And you cannot keep living alone if you are missing alarms and falling." The words came out in the tone Ethan once used when issuing instructions during a dangerous operation. Calm, direct, and leaving no space for debate. Grace looked at him for several seconds. Then she said, "There he is." "Who?" "The man who mistakes fear for authority." Ethan's jaw tightened. "This isn't about authority. You could have been seriously hurt. And your solution is to remove every choice I still have? My solution is to keep you safe." "Safe where? In an apartment chosen by my daughter, with strangers checking whether I have swallowed my pills?" "That might be better than lying on a kitchen floor while an alarm screams beside you." Grace's face lost color, but her voice remained sharp. "You do not care what I want, Ethan."
You saw something frightening, and now you need to turn me into a problem you can solve.
"I came in because your door was unlocked, and you didn't answer."
You came in because a puppy escaped.
"And found you on the floor."
Yes, I fell. Old people fall.
Young soldiers fall too, though they usually call it sacrifice afterward. Ethan stood too quickly. Pain struck his shoulder. "This isn't a joke." "Neither is having your independence measured by the worst 10 minutes of your week." Something in her words reached the part of Ethan that had spent years hiding pain from military physicians because every honest answer threatened to remove him from service. He recognized the fear, but resisted the recognition. "Call Carol," he said. "You call her," Grace replied. "You seem eager to organize my life." Sadie moved between them. Ethan expected the mother dog to face Grace, protecting the puppies from the raised voices.
Instead, Sadie turned her back toward Ethan and sat beside Grace, pressing one warm flank against the older woman's leg. Grace rested her uninjured hand lightly on the dog's shoulder. Sadie did not move away. Ethan stared at them. "Even your dog knows you're being cruel," Grace said. "She isn't my dog. That may be the wisest arrangement for both of you." Ethan's restraint cracked. "You don't know anything about me." "I know you stayed away for nearly 5 years." The kitchen became still. Even the puppies stopped moving. Grace continued more quietly. "Eleanor waited every holiday. She defended you whenever anyone asked why you did not visit. She said you were busy. She said traveling hurt your shoulder. She said soldiers sometimes needed distance." Ethan felt every word strike a place he had armored carefully. "You have no right to discuss my relationship with my mother." "Perhaps not. You were not there for the arguments. You didn't hear what she said when I went back for another deployment. You don't know how she made every choice sound like a betrayal. And you don't know what it cost her to watch you leave. That was between us. Then why are you cleaning out her house instead of speaking to her? Ethan's face grew hot. He wanted to answer, but every possible response sounded either weak or dishonest. Sadie remained beside Grace, not threatening Ethan, merely refusing to stand with him. Carol arrived before evening. She had driven from Milwaukee without stopping, her chin-length auburn hair flattened on one side, and exhaustion deepening the shadows beneath her green eyes. She examined Grace's swollen wrist, the broken cups, and the silent kettle with an expression that shifted between anger and relief. "You're coming home with me," Carol said. "Milwaukee is not my home," Grace replied.
"Then we'll find somewhere close."
"I am not moving."
"You fell."
"I tripped over the chair."
"You couldn't hear the kettle."
"The kettle has always been dramatic." "Mom, I have driven 3 hours every weekend for almost 4 years. I have missed meetings, birthdays, and half of Sunday dinners with my own family because I'm afraid you'll need something and refuse to tell me." Carol's voice broke, and for the first time Ethan understood that her insistence was not cold deficiency. It was exhaustion sharpened by love. Grace looked away. "I never asked you to do that." "That doesn't mean I could leave you alone." "And I never asked to become the reason you resent your life." Carol flinched. Neither woman was entirely wrong. Grace feared that moving would reduce her to age, medications, and risk assessments. Carol feared that one unanswered telephone call would become the moment she had failed her mother forever. They loved each other, but fear had borrowed both their voices. Grace eventually agreed to have her wrist examined and to let Carol stay the night. Before leaving Ethan's kitchen, Grace paused beside the blue window. "You turn every room into a command post," she told him, "because a command post never asks how you feel." Ethan did not answer. He watched Carol guide Grace across the snow while Sadie stood beside the fence with both puppies at her feet. Then Ethan looked back into Eleanor's house, the lists, the boxes, the empty chairs, the note beside the coffee pot. For the first time, he wondered whether the person who most needed the blue hour had been standing inside it all along. The afternoon over Eau Claire was pale and brittle, with old snow packed along the curbs and a weak winter sun shining through clouds too thin to promise warmth. Ethan Miller drove to the rehabilitation center with Eleanor's wrinkled note folded inside his coat pocket. He had spent the morning packing books, avoiding the empty blue hour chairs, and replaying Grace's final accusation. "You turn every room into a command post because a command post never asks how you feel." Ethan had not visited his mother since arriving at the house. He had called the nurses, reviewed expenses, and signed forms. Those tasks had allowed him to remain a responsible son without becoming a present one. The rehabilitation center was a low brick building surrounded by bare maple trees. Inside, the air smelled of disinfectant, boiled vegetables, and the artificial lavender used to make institutions seem less institutional. A nurse named Melissa Grant led Ethan down the corridor. Melissa was a compact woman in her early 40s, with warm brown skin, dark hair braided tightly against her head, and observant black eyes that seemed to notice what families avoided saying. She spoke softly but never vaguely, a habit formed during 15 years of helping frightened patients and impatient relatives understand that recovery followed no military timetable. "Your mother tires quickly," Melissa said. "Give her time to find her words." Ethan nodded as though receiving instructions before an operation. "How much time?" Melissa stopped outside Eleanor's room. "As much as the sentence needs." Eleanor Miller sat beside the window in a wheelchair, wearing a blue cardigan over a white blouse. At 74, she was smaller than Ethan remembered, her silver hair brushed neatly away from a pale, finely lined face. The stroke had lowered the left side of her mouth and left her left hand resting stiffly in her lap. Her right hand still looked familiar, small, capable, and marked by the faint brown spots of age. Ethan remembered those fingers buttoning his childhood coats, repairing torn hems, and pointing toward the door the night he announced another deployment. Eleanor looked up when he entered. Surprise moved across her face first,
followed by something harder to identify. Relief, perhaps, or caution. "You came," she said slowly. Each word seemed to require its own journey. "I've been at the house," Ethan replied. "I know." Eleanor's voice was thin but clear. "Grace tells me." Ethan pulled a chair closer. "Grace tells everyone everything." Eleanor attempted to smile. It failed halfway, not because she did not feel it, but because her face no longer obeyed equally on both sides. The sight unsettled him. He looked toward the window instead. "The realtor is coming Friday. The roof needs work. The upstairs windows leak."
"I've started sorting the bills." Eleanor watched him speak, her right thumb rubbing slowly across the edge of her cardigan. "Blue window? Still there?" A small breath left her. Ethan could not tell whether it was relief or fatigue. "People came?" "One person. Nora." Eleanor nodded. "She sits near the door, I know." Silence followed. Ethan had imagined this visit many times while driving across town. In those imagined versions, Eleanor apologized clearly. Ethan answered calmly, and decades of resentment arranged themselves into something understandable. Instead, his mother struggled to finish ordinary sentences while he sat measuring every pause as though it were a failure of effort. "I found out about Blue Hour," Ethan said. Eleanor's eyes lowered. "You never told me." She opened her mouth, stopped, and tried again. "You were gone." "I called." "Sometimes." The single word irritated him more than a speech would have. "I wrote to you from Kandahar. I wrote after Syria."
"I wrote from the hospital in Virginia." Eleanor's fingers tightened around the cardigan. "I answered. Not the letters that mattered." "Ethan." "You answered questions about the weather. You sent newspaper clippings. When I told you I was going back, you said I was choosing strangers over my family." Eleanor's breathing changed, becoming shallow. Melissa's warning returned to him, but the restraint he had practiced all his life was beginning to crack. "Then I come home and find out you open the house every week for people you barely knew. You gave them patience. You gave them silence. You gave them an open door." Eleanor stared at him with wet, gray eyes. "I was your son. Why couldn't you give me the same thing?" The question sounded younger than Ethan intended. It belonged not to a 46-year-old former Navy SEAL, but to the boy who had once stood at a train station waiting for his mother to say she understood why he needed to leave. Eleanor lifted her right hand. The movement was slow and uncertain, but Ethan allowed her fingers to touch his sleeve. "I was afraid," she said. "So was I." "You made fear into—" She stopped. Her face tightened with frustration. Ethan waited for several seconds, then looked away. "Into what?" Eleanor tried again. "Orders, distance, doors." "And you made yours into guilt." The words struck immediately. Eleanor's hand fell from his sleeve. Ethan regretted them, but regret had never taught him how to retrieve a sentence once spoken. They sat in a silence that felt different from Nora's 10 minutes. Nora's silence had asked for dignity. This silence contained damage. Eleanor looked toward the snow outside. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I opened the door for them because you closed yours to me." Ethan felt the answer enter him like cold air. It did not settle anything. It did not excuse the unanswered letters or his mother's accusations. It only revealed that each of them had experienced the other's pain as rejection. He wanted to argue, but Eleanor had already exhausted herself, reaching the end of the sentence. She pointed toward the drawer beside her bed. Ethan opened it and found a small cloth-bound notebook with a faded blue cover. Inside were pages written in Eleanor's careful handwriting. There were names, but no medical conditions, financial problems, or explanations of grief. Beside Nora Blake's name, Eleanor had written, "Likes the chair nearest the door. Never refill her cup without asking."
Beside Grace Turner. Hates being asked if she is all right. Ask whether the roses survived instead. Ethan turned another page. His own name appeared among the neighbors. Ethan calls on Fridays. Do not ask about the war. Let him talk about engines. On another page, Ethan sounded tired. He said he was fine. Listen longer next time. There were dozens of entries across several years. Then, 5 years earlier, they stopped. Ethan stared at the final note bearing his name. He did not call. Do not punish silence with more silence. He closed the notebook carefully. Eleanor was watching him, unable to finish the apology her face appeared to be forming. Ethan stood. I'll come back, he said. Eleanor nodded, but neither of them pretended that one visit had repaired anything. When Ethan reached the house, Grace was waiting on the porch with Sadie beside her. The mother German shepherd paced in tight circles, her amber eyes fixed on the smaller female puppy lying inside the blanket-lined basket. The 7-week-old puppy had refused food since morning. Her tan eyebrows looked unusually dull, and her small body seemed to fold inward rather than rest. Ethan drove them to a veterinary clinic where Dr. Hannah Cole examined the puppy. Hannah was 38, medium height, with copper-brown hair tied in a loose knot, lightly freckled skin, and calm green eyes. She had a direct but gentle manner, shaped by years of treating frightened animals and owners who often needed reassurance more urgently than their pets. After checking the puppy's temperature, gums, breathing, and abdomen, Hannah found no sign of serious disease. She is slightly chilled and probably stressed, Hannah explained. Keep her warm, offer small amounts of food frequently, and watch her closely tonight. Call if she becomes weaker, vomits, or has trouble breathing. Back at the house, Ethan warmed a towel and reached for the puppy. Sadie immediately stepped over her daughter, shoulders rigid and lips lifting. Ethan stopped. I'm trying to help. Sadie's low growl deepened. Each time Ethan moved closer, the mother dog became more defensive. His instincts told him to take control before the puppy weakened further. Grace, wearing a brace around her bruised wrist, sat quietly near the kitchen wall. Stop looking at Sadie like she's refusing an order, Grace said. She thinks you're taking her baby. The puppy needs warmth. Then let Sadie decide whether you can provide it. Ethan lowered himself to the floor. And do what? Nothing? He almost laughed. Nothing had always seemed to Ethan like another word for failure. Still, he turned his body slightly away from Sadie, placed the warm towel beside him, and avoided her eyes. Minutes passed. The male puppy climbed into Ethan's lap and attempted to chew a button from his shirt. Grace pretended not to smile. Sadie remained over the weaker puppy. Ethan waited until his injured shoulder ached and his legs grew numb. He thought of Eleanor trying to force language through a body that no longer obeyed. He thought of the notebook, filled with evidence that listening had once been his mother's imperfect way of loving him. At last, Sadie lowered her head, took the weak puppy gently by the scruff, and carried her toward Ethan. She placed the puppy on the warm towel beside his knee, then remained standing over both of them. Ethan did not reach immediately. He waited until Sadie touched her nose to his hand. Only then did he wrap the puppy carefully and lift her against his chest. Sadie lay down with her side pressed firmly against his boot, close enough to take the puppy back if trust became regret. Ethan sat on the kitchen floor, holding the small, warm body, while Grace quietly left them alone. He understood that Sadie had not surrendered. She had offered him a narrow piece of faith and retained the right to withdraw it. Strength had not earned that moment. Patience had. For the first time, Ethan understood that trust did not arrive when someone proved powerful enough to take control. Sometimes it arrived only after a person became patient enough not to. The ice storm reached Eau Claire after sunset, first as a soft clicking against the windows, then as a hard silver rain that coated every branch, railing, and power line in glass. By early evening, the streetlights had become blurred halos behind the frozen air.
Ethan Miller stood in his mother's kitchen with a smaller German Shepherd puppy wrapped in a warm towel against his chest. The puppy had eaten twice since the veterinary visit, and now slept with her muzzle tucked beneath Ethan's beard. Sadie lay close to his boots, watching every movement with the quiet suspicion of a mother who had offered trust but had not forgotten how easily trust could be mishandled. The male puppy chewed the corner of a folded blanket, entirely unaware that the world outside was becoming dangerous. The lights flickered once. Ethan looked toward the cobalt pane. The blue square trembled across the icy yard, vanished, returned, then disappeared completely. The refrigerator stopped humming. The furnace fell silent. Somewhere beyond the house, a transformer burst with a low blue flash. The blue window went dark. Ethan set the puppy beside Sadie and immediately began making a list. Flashlights, batteries, blankets, generator. He checked his phone and found a message from Melissa Grant confirming that the rehabilitation center had emergency power and Eleanor was safe. Relief lasted only a few seconds. He thought of Nora alone across the street, Grace next door, and the other elderly neighbors whose names filled Eleanor's blue notebook. "I'm checking the block," he said. Sadie stood as he reached for his coat, but instead of following him, she positioned herself over both puppies. "Come on." Sadie did not move. "Sadie, heel." The mother dog's ears shifted toward the windows, where ice struck the glass like thrown gravel. She glanced at Ethan, then lowered herself around the puppies. Ethan clipped the leash to her collar and pulled gently. Sadie planted all four paws. "We don't have time for this." He tried again, and the dog's body became rigid. She was not disobeying him out of fear for herself. The wind, cracking trees, and unfamiliar darkness had made leaving her pups unthinkable. Ethan looked down at the small female, still weak enough to need warmth every few hours. He could carry one puppy, perhaps both, but not while moving safely across frozen yards. He could secure Sadie in the house, but then he would spend every minute wondering whether the pipes had frozen, the furnace had failed, or a falling branch had broken a window. He stood in the dark kitchen with his hand on the leash and confronted a truth he had resisted for most of his life. He could not protect Sadie, two puppies, Eleanor, Grace, Nora, and an entire neighborhood alone. Ethan called Grace. She answered after the third ring, speaking louder than necessary. "I can see your house is dark." "Mine is too." "Stay inside." That sounded suspiciously like an order. "Grace, this is serious." "Then stop wasting time telling me what I already know." Ethan closed his eyes. "I need help checking everyone." There was a pause. Grace did not tease him. "Come next door," she said, "and bring Eleanor's notebook." Grace sat at her dining table beneath a battery lantern, her silver white hair tucked behind her ears and her bruised wrist still supported by a dark brace. Beside the lantern lay an old paper address book swollen with years of inserted notes, Christmas cards, and numbers written in several colors of ink. "Phones die," Grace said. "Paper is stubborn." She began calling names from the book while Ethan read from Eleanor's notebook. Nora answered immediately and said she had blankets, 2 thermoses, and no intention of being carried anywhere. Grace called Carol next. Despite the icy roads, Carol was already in her vehicle, her practical voice tight with concentration. "I have tire chains and 4-wheel drive. Tell me who cannot walk safely." Within minutes, the improvised plan grew beyond Ethan's control, and, to his surprise, became stronger because of it. The first person Carol brought was Walter Pike, an 81-year-old retired electrician with a narrow, stooped frame, a square gray beard, and large hands permanently scarred by decades of wire, tools, and winter work. Walter spoke slowly, disliked unnecessary praise, and had lost his wife 12 years earlier. Since then, he repaired lamps for neighbors because, as he once told Eleanor, "Darkness is less frightening when a man knows where the switch failed." He carried a red metal toolbox and inspected Ethan's small portable generator without waiting to be asked. Nora arrived next, wrapped in the same brown coat, carrying folded wool blankets instead of her empty cup. Behind Nora came June Holloway, a 78-year-old widow with a broad face, soft brown skin, and iron gray hair braided over one shoulder. June had spent 30 years cooking in a public elementary school and believes no emergency became more dignified because everyone was hungry. She brought a covered pot of chicken stew, 6 spoons, and a warning that anyone criticizing the amount of salt could eat snow. Carol returned with Leon Price, an 84-year-old retired bus driver, tall even with his bent back, with smooth, dark skin, and a white mustache that lifted whenever he smiled. Leon carried 3 flashlights, a deck of cards, and a route map of the neighborhood, marked with the homes of residents who used oxygen machines or mobility aids. The final arrival was Miriam Bell, 79, a small, pale woman with cropped silver hair and careful blue eyes. Miriam had worked as a pharmacy clerk and brought a handwritten list of everyone's medications, allergies, and emergency contacts. 6 older neighbors gathered in Eleanor's house, and none of them arrived empty-handed. Walter and Ethan moved the generator beneath the detached garage awning, far enough from windows and doors to keep exhaust outside. Walter inspected the extension cords before allowing Ethan to start it. "A generator is useful," Walter said, "but carbon monoxide does not care how heroic anyone feels." The machine coughed twice, then rumbled to life. They powered the furnace blower, refrigerator, and 2 lamps, avoiding unnecessary appliances. Inside, June warmed the stew on a gas burner while Miriam organized medications, and Nora placed blankets around the living room. Leon and Carol used the route map to call 2 neighbors whose families had already collected them. Ethan watched the room fill with movement. No one behaved like a helpless victim. Grace coordinated calls. Nora remembered which widow hated being fussed over. Walter protected the house from Ethan's impulse to overload the generator. June fed everyone. Leon tracked the street. Miriam made sure no one missed a dose. Ethan had believed leadership meant carrying the heaviest burden. That night, leadership looked more like allowing many hands to touch it. Sadie entered the living room with the puppies beside her. At first, the mother German shepherd remained near the doorway, scanning each stranger. Then June placed a folded quilt near the center of the room and sat several feet away without reaching toward the dogs. Sadie circled the quilt, settled upon it, and allowed both puppies to curl against her belly. She did not hide them beneath the table. Her eyes remained watchful, but she accepted the room. Later, Carol sat beside Grace while sleet scraped the roof. "I can't keep pretending I hear everything," Grace said, staring at her hands. Carol's face softened. Grace continued, "I will try the hearing aids, but you will not choose where I live, sell my house, or schedule my life without me." Carol nodded slowly. "Then you agree to a daily check-in, a call, a text, or someone at the door. 1 check-in, morning and evening. 1 call and 1 text." Grace considered it. "You negotiate like a used car dealer." "I learned from you." They did not solve everything. They reached terms. Near dawn, the power returned. The furnace clicked into full life, and every lamp in the house brightened. Ethan stood beside the switch behind the cobalt pane, but did not turn it on. The others looked toward him. "Who should the blue window belong to?" he asked. Nora adjusted a blanket around Miriam's shoulders before answering. "No one," she said. "That is how it can belong to all of us." 3 days after the ice storm, sunlight returned to Eau Claire with a hard white brightness that revealed every broken branch, damaged gutter, and new expense winter had left behind. Ethan Miller sat at his mother's kitchen table with a calculator, Eleanor's medical statements, 2 property tax notices, and an estimate for repairing the rear foundation. The figures did not soften, simply because the blue window had become meaningful. Eleanor's rehabilitation costs continued each day. The furnace was nearly 20 years old. The roof would need more than temporary patches before another Wisconsin winter. Affection could make a house feel alive, but affection did not negotiate with insurance companies. Sadie lay near Ethan's chair with both puppies beside her. The smaller female had regained her appetite and now attacked the tassel of a rug with impressive determination. The larger male had discovered Ethan's socks. 3 pairs had vanished during the past week, each later found behind the living room armchair where Sadie had carried them whenever Ethan left the house for too long. Ethan had no proof the behavior was deliberate, but the mother German Shepherd's expression whenever he recovered a sock suggested otherwise. A black sedan stopped outside shortly before noon. Ethan watched a woman and a man step onto the cleared sidewalk. The woman introduced herself as Rebecca Sloan, a 49-year-old real estate attorney with a medium build, straight ash blonde hair cut above her shoulders, and cool gray eyes behind narrow glasses. Rebecca's navy coat was immaculate despite the melting snow, and her speech was measured, efficient, and careful not to promise more than the documents allowed. Years of handling disputed estates had taught her that houses carried emotions far heavier than their assessed value. But she kept those observations behind professional courtesy. The man beside her was Mark Ellison, 56, Regional Acquisitions Manager for North Pines Stays. Mark was tall and broad through the chest, with a clean-shaven, square face, thinning, sandy hair, and a practiced smile that appeared before anyone had said anything amusing. He was not openly cruel. He was simply accustomed to seeing neighborhoods as market zones and homes as units that could perform better with updated finishes and higher nightly rates. They sat beneath the cobalt window while Sadie watched from the doorway. Mark opened a leather portfolio containing photographs, renovation projections, and a purchase agreement. North Pines Stays planned to convert Eleanor's house into a short-term rental, aimed at visitors attending winter festivals, university events, and summer river tours. The offer was higher than Ethan expected. It would pay the property debt, cover many months of Eleanor's care, and leave enough for Ethan to rent a small apartment without immediately seeking full-time work. "We would preserve the exterior character," Mark said. "Guests respond well to historic details." Ethan looked toward the blue pane. "Including that?" Mark followed his gaze. "Possibly. Our design team might make it part of the branding." The word struck Ethan strangely. The blue window had held silence, grief, tea, arguments, and a room full of neighbors during a storm. In Mark's mouth, it became an attractive feature for online photographs. Rebecca slid the agreement closer. "You are not required to decide today, but the company's offer expires Friday." Ethan read the first page. Signing would be practical. Practicality had carried him through injuries, deployments, and every night when sleep refused to come. Yet when he imagined strangers renting the house for a weekend and posing beneath the cobalt light, he felt anger rise, followed immediately by shame. A community memory did not become his simply because he had recently discovered it. Still, keeping the house because he felt guilty would be another kind of vanity. Ethan placed the pen down. "I need a few hours." Mark's smile remained polite. "Of course. Sentiment deserves consideration. Numbers usually become clearer afterward." Grace arrived before the sedan had reached the corner. She wore small silver hearing aids tucked behind both ears. For the first time, she entered after knocking because she had heard Ethan moving inside. "They itch," she announced. "And now I can hear the refrigerator judging me." Ethan told her about the offer. He expected outrage. Instead, Grace sat across from him and studied the figures. "It is a fair amount." "That's all you have to say? Did you want me to chain myself to the porch? I thought the house mattered to you." "It does." Grace leaned back. "But gratitude cannot pay Eleanor's bills, and nostalgia should not require you to destroy your future." Her directness disappointed him, though he knew it was more honest than a dramatic plea. "Then I should sell." "I did not say that either. I said staying has a price. Find out whether you can pay it without becoming resentful." That evening, the neighbors gathered around the kitchen table, not for Blue Hour, but for arithmetic. Carol joined by video from Milwaukee, her auburn hair pulled back and reading glasses resting low on her nose. She worked in payroll administration for a medical supply company and approached the household finances with the same disciplined attention she once used to track Grace's missed calls. Walter inspected the detached garage and said it could become a repair workshop with better wiring, insulation, and a properly vented heater.
Leon suggested a clear price board so no one would mistake Ethan's labor for endless charity. June warned that accepting baked pies as payment would eventually result in diabetes and bankruptcy. Miriam calculated a modest monthly contribution from regular Blue Hour visitors to cover heating, electricity, coffee, and basic maintenance. No one proposed collecting donations to save Ethan. No one promised the plan would be easy. They argued over costs, liability, hours, and boundaries. Grace insisted Blue Hour should open only twice a week. "You are not becoming the neighborhood's unpaid night watchman," she told Ethan. "People need a door, not another exhausted man collapsing behind it." Carol agreed to maintain the accounts remotely if every payment and expense was recorded. Walter knew an administrator at Chippewa Valley Community College who needed someone to teach a part-time evening course in basic home repair. The administrator, Dr. Samuel Reed, called the next morning. Samuel was 61, a lean black man with a closely trimmed salt and pepper beard, deep-set brown eyes, and the patient voice of someone who had spent 3 decades helping nervous adults return to classrooms after long absences. A childhood in a house where broken plumbing often remained broken had shaped his belief that practical skills gave people dignity. He offered Ethan 2 evening classes each week, teaching safe household repairs, tool use, and basic maintenance. The salary was modest, but dependable. By Thursday afternoon, they had a plan. The garage would become a paid repair workshop for lamps, small appliances, loose cabinet doors, and minor household items Ethan could handle safely. Prices would be posted. No emergency calls after 8 except genuine danger. Blue Hour would operate Wednesday and Sunday evenings. Participants able to contribute would pay a small monthly amount. Those unable to pay could help with cleaning, food, transportation, or record keeping. Eleanor's care would remain the first expense, not an afterthought beneath the house's symbolism. During the final discussion, Grace removed one hearing aid and placed it on the table. "Why did you do that?" Ethan asked. "Your explanation has exceeded its useful length." The others laughed. Beneath the table, the male puppy climbed onto Ethan's boot, while the smaller female pulled at his shoelace. "They need names," June said. "They need homes," Ethan replied. "Not here." Sadie emerged from behind the armchair carrying another one of Ethan's socks. Grace watched the dog drop it beside the puppies. "Certainly, Sadie appears deeply committed to separation." By the end of the evening, June had named the male Milo, and Nora had quietly named the female Lucy. Ethan objected twice and then used both names before everyone left. On Friday morning, Rebecca returned alone. Ethan signed the withdrawal form and declined the company's offer. The decision did not make the bills disappear. It did not guarantee the workshop would succeed or that Eleanor's condition would improve. After Rebecca left, Ethan removed the "for sale" sign from the frozen yard. He did not break it or throw it into the trash. He carried it into the shed and placed it carefully against the wall where it remained visible. Staying was not a miracle. It was not a reward for becoming a better man. It was a choice that would demand money, labor, boundaries, and patience every day. Ethan closed the shed, looked toward the blue pane, and understood that choosing a home was not the same as being rescued by it. A person had to keep choosing it. Spring came slowly to Eau Claire, loosening winter one dripping roof at a time. Snow withdrew from the sidewalks in gray islands, exposing flattened grass, lost gloves, and the first stubborn green shoots beside Eleanor Miller's porch. By April, the cobalt pane no longer cast its light over snow. Instead, it laid a blue square across the wooden floor each afternoon, moving gradually from the front window toward the center of the room. Ethan had stopped measuring the house by how quickly it could be emptied. He now measured it by smaller things: the number of repaired lamps waiting in the garage workshop, the 2 evenings marked for Blue Hour, and the distance Lucy could run before tripping over her own paws. Milo had grown into a long-legged, broad-footed German Shepherd puppy, whose body seemed to develop faster than his judgment. He collided with chair legs, attempted to carry tools too heavy for him, and once became trapped inside an empty laundry basket after climbing in to steal a sock. Lucy remained smaller and more deliberate, with tan eyebrows, dark, intelligent eyes, and an odd instinct for choosing the quietest person in any room. Sadie was calmer now, her sable coat brighter in the warmer light, though calmness had not made the mother dog obedient. She still inspected every visitor, still moved the puppies when she disliked the arrangement of a room, and still hid one of Ethan's socks behind the armchair whenever he returned later than expected. Eleanor came home on a mild Sunday afternoon. Carol drove her from the rehabilitation center while Ethan waited on the porch with Grace. Eleanor wore the same blue cardigan from Ethan's visit, though it hung more loosely on her narrow frame. Her silver hair had been carefully brushed, and her left hand remained curled against her lap. Recovery had given her more strength, but not certainty. Some sentences arrived whole, others lost their way before reaching the final word. Ethan had spent the morning checking the porch ramp, moving rugs, and measuring clear paths between furniture until Grace threatened to hide his tape measure. "Your mother's coming to visit," Grace told him, adjusting the silver hearing aid behind her right ear. "She is not inspecting a naval vessel." Grace still lived next door. She had accepted the hearing aids, the daily check-in system, and Carol's more frequent visits, but she had made no promises about remaining in the house forever. Carol, in return, had stopped sending assisted living brochures every week. Their peace was imperfect, negotiated, and therefore more believable than surrender. When Eleanor entered the living room, 6 people stood to greet her. Nora waited near the door, exactly as the blue notebook had described. Walter held a repaired table lamp. June brought lemon cake. Leon had polished his white mustache as though attending a ceremony, and Miriam carried Eleanor's medication schedule in a neat folder. Eleanor looked from one face to another. Recognition appeared and vanished like sunlight through moving clouds. "Grace," she said correctly. Then she called Leon by the name of a man who had died many years earlier. She stared at Nora for several seconds before asking whether they had met at church. No one corrected her quickly. No one demanded proof that the old connections remained intact. Nora simply answered, "We have shared a few quiet evenings." Eleanor seemed satisfied. Then Eleanor looked at Ethan. Her gray eyes softened. "You fixed the porch," she said. "I did." "You always were good with—" The sentence stopped. Her brows drew together as she searched for the missing word. Ethan waited. He did not supply it. "Things," Eleanor finished at last. "That's true," he said. A few minutes later, she called him by his father's name. The mistake passed through Ethan with a sharpness he had not expected. For an instant, he wanted to correct her, to pull her memory back into place and prove that she still knew her own son. Then he saw the fear in her face, the awareness that something had gone wrong, though she did not know what. Ethan sat beside her instead. "I'm here," he said. Eleanor studied him. Whether she found Ethan or the memory of someone else, he could not tell. But her shoulders relaxed. Milo chose that moment to race through the room carrying Walter's glove. Sadie followed at a measured pace while Lucy attempted to block Milo's escape and was rolled gently onto her back. Eleanor laughed. The sound was uneven but unmistakable. For several minutes she watched the 3 German shepherds circle the furniture, Milo triumphant, Lucy determined, Sadie appearing embarrassed by both of them. Ethan realized his mother did not need to remember their names to enjoy them. The moment did not become less real because she might lose it later. As the afternoon light shifted, the cobalt pane cast its blue square across the floor beside Eleanor's wheelchair. She noticed it and reached down with her right hand. Her fingers rested inside the colored light, blue spreading over the age spots and thin veins beneath her skin. Everyone in the room became quiet. "Still here?" Eleanor whispered. Ethan did not ask whether she meant the window, the house, or herself. "Yes," he said, "still here." He sat beside her without trying to repair the sentence, recover the memory, or turn the afternoon into evidence of improvement. It was the hardest kind of staying Ethan had ever learned, remaining beside something painful without demanding that it become useful. Blue Hour continued after Eleanor returned to the rehabilitation center. Wednesday and Sunday evenings remained open, but Ethan no longer believed an open door required an unlimited man behind it. On difficult days, he hung a small card beneath the cobalt pane. Tonight, the house needs quiet. The first time he displayed it, he expected disappointment or anger. Instead, June left soup on the porch without knocking. Walter returned the following morning to finish a lamp. Nora walked past, saw the card, and continued home. No one treated Ethan's boundary as abandonment. The blue window had room for darkness because the people beneath it were permitted to have limits. The months turned. The garage workshop earned enough to contribute steadily toward Eleanor's care. Ethan's repair classes filled with adults who had spent years believing tools belonged only in other people's hands. Grace sometimes switched off her hearing aids during Ethan's longer explanations and claimed the batteries had failed. Carol visited without arriving with a suitcase prepared to remove her mother.
Sadie stopped sleeping between the puppies and both exits, though she continued checking every lock before settling down. The following winter, snow covered the street again. One evening, Ethan switched on the lamp behind the cobalt pane. The blue square appeared outside, small and bright against the white ground. A knock came several minutes later. Ethan stood still. He was not afraid of whoever waited beyond the door. He was asking himself a question he had finally learned to respect. Did he have enough strength to open it tonight? Sadie sat beside him. Milo and Lucy crowded against his boots. None of the three dogs pulled toward the entrance. None demanded an answer. Ethan rested his hand on the doorknob. Then he opened the door. Maybe the miracle in Ethan's story was never the blue window itself. Maybe it was the way God used an old house, a wounded mother dog, 2 restless puppies, and a handful of lonely neighbors to teach one guarded man how to stay. Life often convinces people that strength means handling everything alone. But real strength may look quieter. It may mean accepting help, listening without trying to fix every pain, setting a healthy boundary, or opening the door when the heart still has room. Ethan did not heal because every problem disappeared. He healed because he stopped treating love like a mission he had to control. God's miracles do not always arrive as sudden answers. Sometimes they appear as a light in a dark window, a dog resting beside a tired person, or someone who sits with us when words are no longer enough. Perhaps grace is simply God reminding us that no one was created to disappear unnoticed. Share this story with someone who may need that reminder. Tell us in the comments what the blue window meant to you, and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, healing, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your home, and place kind hearts beside you whenever the road feels lonely.